and welcome back. If you haven't seen before, I've posted a few videos. I'm trying to remember how many. You'd think I would, since it's based off my book, and I know there are 7 chapters, but my brain, whoo. But I have them linked down below. Go ahead and check them out. The last videos that I've posted and upcoming videos are all from my book, Gritty Grace of Motherhood. If you're interested in checking it out, check out the link below. This kind of builds on. So these videos, I haven't said this before in the previous video, these videos are realistically a companion with the book. So the book and the videos, you don't need one and the other. Like, you don't need both. But you can, because the videos kind of build on the book a little bit, and the book builds on the videos. It works out that way. So today, in the previous videos, I've been talking about how we got to go down before we go up. Today's the down to bottom. You thought postpartum depression was the bottom. No. You thought maybe anxiety was the bottom. No. Today is the bottom. And I do have to preface this with a disclaimer. This is a hard topic. This is the topic that mothers that I know did not talk about until I experienced it. It is not something that is, it's something that is known about, but it's not actually something that's legitimately talked about. And that is miscarriage. That's right. We're going there, folks. After all, this is the devotional where nothing is off the table. And I'm rather honest, and a lot of people called it a gut punch when they read it in the book, because in my opinion, there is no room for silence when it comes to a lot of these topics. And unfortunately, in today's society, miscarriage is one of those subjects that's not, it's no longer taboo, but it's not like people are sharing unless you've experienced it. When I experienced my miscarriage, I found out that just about every single woman that I had regular communication with had a miscarriage. I had no idea of this. Nobody actually actively talks about it. And I can understand that. It's a very, very sensitive issue. It's a very sensitive topic. But I'm not interested in staying silent about it. So I actually wrote about it in here. The blip I'm gonna read is very, very short, and I am warning you, it's just mildly graphic in terms of the wording, but you get the picture. So it's very short, and chapter is called Peace in the Midst of Grief. I sat and stared at the bright red on the toilet paper, my heart pounding, and I struggled to take a deep breath. The red grew blurry as tears welled up. I discarded the toilet paper and grabbed more, still red, and more red spread in the water. I squeezed my eyes shut. This can't be happening. God, keep my baby safe. Please let my baby be okay. God, please, please, please let this be my imagination. Please let me keep my baby. But it was happening. With tears streaming down my cheeks and sobs catching my breath, I had to tell my husband the worst thing I could tell him. I was losing our baby. My baby. Grief is something that is not the same for everybody. It manifests in different ways. There are different, I would argue, even levels of grief. And I would argue that how somebody handles a miscarriage specifically is different for everybody. And the thing that I got stuck on was it could be worse somewhere else, right? My miscarriage happened, I found out, the pregnancy test that I took was such a faint line. Like, I was no more than 4 and a little bit weeks pregnant when I found out I was pregnant, and I miscarried a week later to the day. So, which, I mean, then some people would sit there and argue, well, that means that the heart was never developed, so it could have been a hormonal pregnancy. It could have been. Like there's all kinds of thoughts that can happen. But a miscarriage is still a miscarriage, right? That positive pregnancy test then embeds hope and embeds expectations and excitement and all of this. And then you're bleeding when you really shouldn't be. And it was awful. I'm not saying it was awful in terms of, like, there was minimum cramping and things like that. But it was just the heart wrench of it. It was such a shock because it was the first time realistically in my entire life where I had to deal with that kind of grief. I had a grandmother die, I've had relatives die, but it was different. But when it comes to miscarriage, it's the unanswered questions. Who were they? What would they look like? Like, I had 2 children before her or him. I in my brain, it's a her. I don't actually know. But I had 2 children before her. So what I have an idea of what they would have looked like. And now I do have a daughter. And I'm like, it brings that back even more. If it was a girl, I have an even clearer image of what she would look like. It's all the unanswered questions. And there's nothing I could do about it. And that drives me nuts. As I've talked about in previous videos, control is one of those hot buttons for me. I like to be in control. I don't like surprises. I don't like interruptions. If you haven't figured that out already. And it was one of those shocking things where this was totally out of my control. And I'll never forget, I had this in the book, but it wasn't until my Opa called. My Opa is Dutch for grandpa, or German. Is it German too? Comment below. Is it German too? I know it's Dutch. But anyway, my Opa called, asked how I was doing. And I was like, well as to be expected. I mean, it could have been worse. My Opa does not raise his voice very often, but he did raise it a couple octaves. He's like, don't do that. It's like, what? He goes, yeah, it can always be worse somewhere else. Oh, look, you lost a finger. It could have been worse. I could have lost the whole hand. Oh, I lost my foot. Oh, it could have been worse. Could have lost the whole leg. Oh, I have cancer. But it could have been worse. Could have been stage 4. Like, we always preface, it could have been worse. But it can always be worse. But that does not negate how you feel right now. That does not dismiss the hard right now. You need to accept the hard and feel the hard. Feel the grief and stop dismissing it. Otherwise, it never gets better. You never develop your faith. You don't end up accepting what happens. It's bad. And that was such a switch for me. It could always be worse somewhere else. But that does not get rid of your individual bad. Your individual hurt. Saying it could have been worse is a coping mechanism that fails every time. So I let myself feel for the first time. Earlier in the previous videos, we've talked about having control over how we respond and how we feel, and how what we feel can be a lie and be misleading. But I think there are some times where how we feel is pretty doggone accurate, and grief is one of those times where I think feeling grief, and crying and allowing yourself to feel is exactly what we need to do. I'm going to read a little bit more of the chapter here because I just think it's so important. I felt anger when someone would offer advice on how to deal with loss. I felt pride when I completed my very first quilt blocks. It broke me when my Bumps First Christmas t-shirt arrived, but I took delight when my child wrapped me in a hug, pat me on the back, and gave me a kiss on the cheek. I bristled when someone brought up my miscarriage in conversation, but I took solace in hearing someone else's experience with grief. When I found out I was pregnant again, I was both terrified and elated. When my son and later my daughter filled my arms, I was sad but also overjoyed. During the first weeks after my miscarriage, people asked my mom how I was doing. She'd tell them I was handling it better than she was. That was not accurate. I couldn't handle it. I couldn't control my grief. I let God control it. God is the only one who can really meet you where you are. He is the only one who can truly understand you, as I've said before. And grief is no exception. Remember Lazarus. Jesus wept because his best friend was gone. He knew what was going to happen. He had the playbook. He knew what the plan was. But that didn't dismiss the grief over the circumstance. Jesus wept. One of the many times I broke, I remember picturing myself running towards Jesus, angry with all my frustrations, questions, and demands. I pounded on his chest, sobbing, "Why?" Jesus didn't budge. He stood tall and strong, gazing down at me and taking the pitiful beating I gave him. No grunts, groans, or huffs. When my temper was exhausted and all I had left were tears, he wrapped me in his arms and held me, strong, sheltering, silent. At no point did I feel him saying, "It will be all right." There was no problem solving, no admonishment to grow up. He didn't lecture me on how it could be worse. He didn't give me the answers. He gave me what I needed. Peace. God's not going to snap his fingers and make your problems go away. He's not going to make your emotions suddenly vanish. I mean, he can, but it's not likely. I think grief is one of those feelings that we just got to feel. And I think the beauty and wonder of God is that he comes alongside of us and he weeps. I think there are times where I picture in my head that he's got one arm around me and one arm around my little kid that he's got up there. And I think it's going to be so cool when I get to meet them. You know how I talked about you have to go down before you come up? Well, now we're going to start to come up in the next video. But I want you to know that you are not alone. The whole 1 in 4 miscarriage statistic, from my experience, is not an accurate statistic, because that 1 in 4 would be taken from moms 9 times out of 10 that have reported the miscarriage. But if you're like me and the miscarriage was, for want of a better term, medically mild, my body did exactly what it was supposed to do. So I never went to a hospital. I never contacted the doctor beyond canceling my appointment. More moms than you know have had a miscarriage. But they don't talk about it. And that makes sense. But I want you to know, from me to you, you are never alone, Mom. Ever. And it doesn't matter when your miscarriage happened, how it happened. Your grief is your grief. And God walks right alongside of you. And he wraps you in his arms. And all you have to do is lean into him and cry. And he'll cry right with you. And he will comfort you in a way that no one else can. Thank you all for watching. And I hope you have a great week.